I first saw the movie Jaws when I was about 8 years old, egged on by a friend's older sister. I was terrified. The image of that shark haunted me. I saw it everywhere. I wouldn't go into the ocean or the pool for a solid year. I avoided even the bathtub for weeks. Fast forward a few years, my family is on vacation on the coast. I'm still scared of swimming, but it's more of a jump at every noise scared than outright aversion. Somehow, despite that, I end up on an introductory scuba course. The water is calm and warm. I'm actually having a great time. And then I see it. A shark. The adrenaline starts pumping. I gasp. But with my next exhale, the fear disappears. This is what I've been so scared of? This bears almost no resemblance to Jaws. It's incredible, not terrifying. Can we all agree? So often, the fiction is scarier than the reality. Think of flying, clowns, and as I can personally attest, public speaking. Let me add one more to the list. Nuclear power. So this isn't actually a talk about fear. It's a talk about how our irrational fiction of nuclear power and things like it affects our very real public policy. Our demand for electricity is going up to 2050, no matter which forecast you look at. We are combating warmer summers, colder winters, and increasing electrification. When we turn to supply, it starts to paint a scary picture. And it gets worse if we remove coal as a source of electricity, as current trends suggest we will. Demand is going to outpace supply by a large amount. People from developing countries can tell you what this means. In South Africa, where I'm from, they call it load shedding. They turn off the power by zip code on a scheduled basis because there isn't enough of it. You have to plan out when to charge your phone, open your business, operate on patience. It cripples an economy. So we have to close the gap. Renewables are great, but insufficient alone. Their production tends to fluctuate, and they often need a lot of real estate. They need a more stable, compact complement. And that complement also needs to be clean, safe, and affordable. That is when nuclear power comes in. Now, I know what you're thinking. Nuclear power? It's too dangerous to be used. Look at Chernobyl. In fact, 2021 polls suggest around half of Americans agree with that statement. It perhaps isn't surprising, given that the most salient image we have of a nuclear power plant operator is this. To be perfectly honest, I used to be in that camp until I spent 2 years working in the industry as a consultant. By the numbers, nuclear power is actually one of the safest sources of electricity. Its death rate is 98% lower than gas and nearly 100% lower than coal. Nuclear power is safe. Still, major incidents loom large. We frequently see them rehashed in Hollywood. It's Jaws all over again. The fictional story sells tickets, but it misrepresents a lot of the facts. When you boil it down, there are really two types of incident: those driven by technical breakdown and those by human error. Take Chernobyl. It was built in the 70s and 80s using a design the rest of the world had abandoned, for good reason. The design itself was inherently unstable. The safety feature meant to stop the reaction, instead sped it up. It was a matter of time until something went wrong. We can contrast this with Fukushima, which is instead a tale of human error. The reactor design at Fukushima was sound. It survived the earthquake without major damage. The issue was the tsunami. But 18 years before the incident, new research suggested that that plant was vulnerable to a tsunami. The international agency recommended a higher barrier, but the local operator and regulator did nothing. It wasn't the technology itself that was so dangerous. It was the humans that chose to ignore prescient advice. These days, designs are highly regulated, and many next-gen designs include passive safety features that mean there is no need for human intervention. Think more Jetsons than Simpsons. But beyond design, Fukushima also shows us that scenario testing and training are critical. It sounds like a tall order, but France has proved it can be done. France generates over 70% of their power from nuclear energy, but has never had an incident that impacted surrounding communities. They have proved that it is possible to consistently operate nuclear power plants in a safe way. They've also shown us better ways to deal with used nuclear fuel. Nuclear waste causes a lot of protests in the US, and understandably so. It sounds scary, and people don't like the idea of it being buried in their backyard. But France has figured out how to recycle the vast majority of this waste, leaving less than 5% to be buried in sealed containers. Recycling isn't perfect, but it's a very good start. Nuclear power is clean and safe. However, at this point, I have to acknowledge that there is an economic reality to consider. This is something that politicians bring up all the time. And it's true, new builds can be expensive. But those costs could come down dramatically. South Korea's KEPCO, for instance, recently built a plant in the UAE that cost less than 60% the most recent new builds in the US. They didn't cut corners or use cheaper materials. They reduced costs through supply chain efficiency. Next-gen designs are looking to capture that efficiency too by designing smaller reactors that can be factory-produced and stacked. Additionally, once a plant is up and running, nuclear power is actually a remarkably cheap source of electricity. It is cheaper than coal or gas. It may even be competitive with wind and solar once you add in their need for storage. Nuclear power is affordable. It is safe and it is clean. Why does that matter? As I said earlier, our demand for electricity is eclipsing our ability to supply it. We have to find new sources of clean power. But for the most part, nuclear has not been part of that discussion. In fact, in many Western economies, we have been closing nuclear power plants for the past 2 decades, and there are more slated to close in the years to come. Why? I'd argue that in many regions, it stems from politicians and activists buying into the Jaws story of nuclear. I hope by now that I have convinced you that that is not the case, and that nuclear is actually part of the solution to a much bigger problem. So what can we do? For those of you headed into politics, I ask that you vote in favor of nuclear. Investors and utilities, I ask that you finance it. For the rest of us, the best thing you can do is spread the word. Be a voice in favor instead of a voice against. Choose not to protest the next time your utility suggests building a nuclear plant. In fact, be an advocate and educate your neighbors. We cannot let fear based on fiction dictate policy in reality. Imagine what we could do as a society with a limitless source of clean, cheap power. In my home country, it would make a huge difference. What would it mean for yours? Thank you.